blocks. The first block, which we just had the opening question for, is focusing on basically introducing the AIIB and discussing its current and potential future governance strategies. And then we will move to the bigger picture about the MDB system as a whole. You're fully aware, all of you, I assume, that there are increasing demands on multilateral development banks to finance especially green transition projects, and we will look at what the AIIB can do here. And then in the final block, we will, take the look into the future and discuss how the AIIB can evolve further. But now coming back to the first block, I would like to ask Ludger in particular about sort of, how the AIIB is special. I mean, you gave your personal perspective, but if you could just explain again how the AIIB was set up, and maybe also comment on recent changes in the governance that marks the AIIB out compared with other MDBs.
Thank you, Friederike. I think there are a number of issues which are very similar to other MDBs. It's very important to stress what is similar. The high standards, the strong governance and accountability. What is different? I think the fact that the AIIB has to, with high quality project, cover its costs. I think that is not true for all multilateral development banks. Then it is a bank where no group of countries can dominate. We have a shareholdership which is China as the biggest shareholder, then the advanced countries, Europe and other regions are about 25–30%, and then emerging countries from Asia in particular make up the almost 50% of the rest. So this makes the bank, gives it a very balanced ownership, a very balanced share of the voting power, and combined with that, we have a 75% majority requirement for all important decisions. 75% means you basically need to work for consensus. So in our decision making, we are a consensus-oriented bank. No group dominates, no group can kind of dictate to others what it means. And that, with what I mentioned, it's a bank of the 21st century also from that perspective, that it doesn't have a majority ownership of the advanced countries like some of the traditional banks. And maybe finally also the efficiency in the governance is also a very important principle, and good accountability, because we have a non-resident board. So our directors of our board of directors is not living in Beijing. They are, so to speak, part-time directors, but that means the focus for them has to be more strategic. We have to serve the board in a more strategic manner, and I think that's a good thing, because it means that we have to be efficient with the board. We have to have good accountability mechanisms so that the board can supervise us well, but it also gives us responsibility ourselves. So I don't want to go too much more into the details.
In fact, that's fine. No, that's interesting. I mean, the non-resident board, of course, is very unique, or it's unique, right? No other bank, multilateral development bank, does that. But also, just wanted to ask a follow-up question on this consensus principle. Don't you sometimes feel that things are slow because you need to get such broad consensus, or what's your view on that?
The consensus, the 75% majority holds for the strategy and policy decisions. Projects are normally on a 50% majority, or they're even delegated to the management, to the president. So the less important projects, or the projects that already go through the boards of other banks because they're co-financed, those are majority-based or presidents decided. So there we don't have this speed issue, because for projects you have to also sometimes be fast, or at least when you take the certain time, you can't have the decision delayed too much. But the 75% majority is for the strategy and policy decisions, and I think there it is actually okay to take the time. Like our energy strategy, it took over a year to find agreement on the energy strategy, but we now have an energy strategy that was agreed by unanimity. So all our directors, all our members are behind it, And yes, it may have taken a few months more, but in the sensitive sector like energy, I think it is a great achievement to have that unanimity.
Okay, thank you. Sharifa, I'd like to turn to you. Bangladesh is a client country of the AIIB. Many projects take place there. Could you give us your perspective of what it's like working with the AIIB?
Bangladesh has very positive views about the activities and performance of AIIB. I just want to mention that we got $1.5 billion for COVID support, also for the budget support for overcome the current economic crisis, which has caused serious depletion of our reserves and increased the inflation. At this crisis moment, the $1.5 billion is extremely important for us. So we thank you, AIIB, for the very quick response to us. And just now we had the meeting with the AIIB Vice VP Patel, and he said you were introducing another CRM, crisis management system, in the AIIB. So that is another window. I think I like it. And we have maybe the highest recipient, I'm not sure. We already had $3 billion pipeline in 18 projects. Ongoing projects is 18 projects are ongoing. We have another almost 5 billion in the pipeline. So you can see how big profile AIIB has in Bangladesh. And we expect this portfolio will increase in the upcoming days because this has the mutual trust between each and others. The most important thing already he mentioned, ADB has a regional director, non-resident directorships. That is very important for us. Our colleagues can regularly meet the AIIB colleagues for the financing of different projects. They keep us updated. They know regularly what is happening in the AIIB. So this is one way to have regular interaction and close partnership with AIIB. That is very important for us. And I already mentioned that the project we got, already you mentioned that the consensus is needed. Maybe it's delay the project, but for us, it is delaying most of the cases in Bangladesh side rather than the ADB side. We are some process for completion of the project approval process, but we always find that ADB's response and decision making in supporting our project is always very quick. So I thank you. We bear very positive relationship, and we feel that in the upcoming days, AIIB will be much better, show the much better performance in the global world in financing us.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sharifa. I mean, Turkey also has some projects with the AIIB, I presume. Can you give us the perspective from Turkey, please?
Sure, thank you. Let me first set the scene for our relations with the AIIB. Recent years have marked a notably turbulent phase in the global economy and a transition towards a new normal after the pandemic was interrupted by geopolitical tensions. And on the other hand, a threat of climate change on global economic activity urges us to implement coherent policies. And in the midst of all this gloom, we have to remind ourselves that we have a set of multilateral development banks, and AIIB is one of them. MDBs, multilateral development banks, have the potential, scale, reach, knowledge and tools to play a bigger role in confronting these challenges. The current conditions compel us to challenge the conventional wisdom and be bolder in advancing new thinking and approaches for addressing global problems. And MDBs must incorporate the new realities into their business models. 21st century world actually needs capable global institutions which can provide long-term finance. And AIIB's establishment came at the right time with the right context. Its mandate fits very well to the global institutional system. Its business model has a range of distinctive attributes. First one is that it has a practical approach to combining investment and capacity building. It has a focus on complementing and mobilizing private sector finance. And it has the ability to work with both with private and public sectors. And with these attributes, the bank has proven itself to be relevant since its establishment. With this actually set up, let me also refer to the actions of AIIB, because actions ultimately speak louder than words. Let me touch upon the leading actions so far. First, let me stress the quality and flexibility side of AIIB. AIIB has consistently delivered strong levels of high-quality projects, and we see no difference in terms of standards that AIIB adopted and like operational. Nobody predicted that predicted about the eruption of the COVID pandemic, but during the pandemic, the bank acted flexibly, and the amount that AIIB provided by COVID response facility reached to $14 billion. And second, what distinguishes AIIB from its peers is its governance structure. MDBs in general bear the word bank in their title, but they are not licensed or authorized entities by any regulatory authority. Actually, the word bank denotes their financing role only. So their policies and rules are set up by their shareholders as a matter of supranational self-regulation. So directors and governors are the ones that oversight the MDBs, including AIIB. So I refer the board members as priority setters. AIIB's board of directors is non-resident, but with the guidance of its board, it has set up the system, processes, and tools to engage the board with the bank's activities closely. We observe that the communications are conducted through various means, and the board is informed and consulted in a transparent and accountable way. Inclusive decision-making is encouraged. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. So I take from that lots of praise for the speed in which the AIIB is able to operate. I take the praise about the standards that don't differ or are in fact the same high standards that you see with other MDBs. But one topic, I think you brought it up, Sharifa, is also the great need to finance more green transition, and that is the topic of the second block. How can the MDB system as a whole rise to this challenge? And I'd like to pass the mic to Helene. I know the Swiss government has done some thinking about the evolution of the MDB system. I mean, you know, bearing in mind that we have an AIIB audience, what are your suggestions how the MDB system should adapt and rise to this challenge?
So first of all, as a European shareholder, or let me call us a stakeholder, I think that describes our role better. I'm of course happy to hear that the client countries are content how the bank works. I think that's of course almost the best news I have to say of today. But since all of you are here to discuss and see how we can become better, there are 2 points that I would pick out. The Swiss paper says more, but because you asked us to be brief, so I want to be brief. One is, of course, the fact that we're all dealing with scarce resource, so I think a coordination among the MDBs would be welcomed from our side. We believe that there should be a division of labor We're not that, satisfied if we see that there's lots of things which are done and multiplied. And so I think for us, seek structures and mechanisms that can actually enable complementarity. That would be for us something that we should all strive for. And then, I mean, you gave very positive feedbacks, but I can imagine it can be quite difficult if all these MDBs, and then in Bangladesh we're a bilateral donor, so also the bilateral donors are knocking on your door. So we believe a country level coordination is something that we always talk about. Even in bilateral donors, we discuss it. I've been to some roundtables in Laos, and we always talk about it, but I'm not sure if we really have achieved it. So for us, a country-level coordination, and it should of course be led by the client country governments. That would be for us gaining in efficiency, effectiveness, and I think even more so it would sort of promote the common understanding of development challenges. And I think if we would be doing this coordinating thing a bit more, we would become more agile and probably adapt better to the reality in the country. So that would be one. And then second, I'm a big fan of cross-border connectivity, and I can explain why. I've been ambassador, before this job, I've been ambassador to Southern Africa, and I've been ambassador in Southeast Asia. And I've been always amazed on how actually these regions are exporting and trading to my country, but have very little possibility to actually grow economically in the region. And one reason is, of course, often, I have to say, the lack of connectivity. Now, there are lots of ideas. We have to become green, so there's lots of demands on infrastructure national, but I somehow am a strong believer that if we connect a region better, that will really enhance well-being of population and will also have a positive impact on the environment, because you know, the short distances in the region actually, if we can manage to create wealth in the region, I think that would be a positive thing. So those would be my two. As I said, the paper is a bit longer, but we want to go to the gala dinner at one point, right?
Well. I mean, let's put these two very interesting suggestions to Ludger. So cross-country country-level coordination, number one, and also a cross-country regional connectivity. I mean, what can the AIIB do, and what is it doing already? How is it partnering with others to live up to those two suggestions from Switzerland?
Cooperation is certainly an extremely important topic and priority for us. I mean, there is already the cooperation we do with other MDBs when we work with our client countries in our projects. I don't know exactly what share, but I think it's at least a third of our projects that are in collaboration or as co-financing with other MDBs. Then in terms of collaboration of countries, I mean, I'm corporate secretary. One of my particular ambitions is to get the engagement in the governance of the bank by all countries, not just by the big countries or the rich countries. So having that collaboration promoted, that you don't just borrow, you're also a member with a voice. That is a particular priority also of our bank. Now you think, how does that square with a non-resident board? Well, first of all, I mean, our board is not that large. We have only 12 directors, so that's an advantage. It's a disadvantage because it means constituencies have more members, so they have to coordinate amongst themselves. But we have a plan for a program that, with which we want to improve the constituency coordination and member participation, so that we have really a broad ownership of the bank. You know, if you have a bank that has broad distribution of voting shares, sorry to come back to voting shares, but ultimately it is about voting shares. And so if you have a bank where emerging and developing countries have a large majority of the vote, then you also have to make sure that they participate. In terms of connectivity, that really is a project-related priority. if I look back 7 years or 8 years, almost 10 years when we negotiated the Articles of Agreement, connectivity was a big theme. It was still the heydays of globalization. It was like almost taken for granted that you would connect all countries through roads, ports, airports, and whatnot, telecom. That, I think, is still very important, but the climate agenda has, of course, taken over a bit. The climate agenda has become a bit more dominant. Still, I think in all this we will not neglect connectivity. We have a number of projects that ensure transport and energy connectivity. Energy connectivity will be very important for the climate agenda, because only if we manage to transport the renewable energy, hydro in whatever form, from the energy-rich countries to the energy-poor ones, will we also master climate change. So connectivity has in a way become a more complex topic in the bank, with that two dimensions, the traditional trade connectivity and the climate-related connectivity.
Sorry, I want to ask a follow-up question, Ludger. The G20 recently called on the MDBs as a whole, on all the MDBs, to do more to finance green projects. I know the AIIB is already meeting its target of financing 50% green. How do you see that in comparison with others, and what can the AIIB do more to cooperate with other MDBs to leverage even more in the green arena? For Ludger, that's for Ludger again.
Yeah, if you don't mind, yeah. No, we are very much part of the discussion of the MDB reform, capital adequacy framework discussions, and we have a couple of elements I think we can really contribute. One is balance sheet space. This technical term basically means we still have quite some room to actually lend to our client countries. Our partner MDBs are much more constrained, especially with some countries, so that often we can help to finance projects in countries where other MDBs have less space. So this kind of collaboration is, I think, a good contribution for that widening of the finance space that the MDBs have committed to in the G20 context. And then we are also engaging in some innovative ways of enlarging the financing space of MDBs. We have just done a guarantee of a World Bank portfolio with the mutual benefits that the World Bank can now do more lending because we have guaranteed that. And for us, because of the composition of the portfolio we guarantee, it has the beneficial side effect that we can actually do more lending, especially to high-risk countries, because we diversify our portfolio through this guarantee. So if you do smart collaboration, it's really a win-win between the MDBs.
Thank you. Sharifa, turning to Bangladesh, this new, I mean, it's not such a new, but this quite fashionable focus on green. What's your view from Bangladesh? Don't you also need, as you know, if I may put it, classic infrastructure that's maybe not so green? What's your view on this green emphasis, and is it potentially holding you back in other areas of development that you also still need?
Thank you. Considering the current threat of global warming and carbon emission, there is no denying the fact that we all have to address the climate change issue as topmost development agenda. We all are affected by the climate change, but the LDCs like us are more vulnerable. Bangladesh is the 7th largest vulnerable countries, and it is expected that 1/10 of our area will be will go to the sea by 2050. So we are really climate victim countries, and every year we found that the flood, thunderstorm is increasing. So it is now a big agenda for Bangladesh like other. So we all have the responsibility to protect this planet, to protect all of us, not only human beings, also all the animals, to make this earth livable for us. So under any circumstances, green and climate resilience development is the only solution for all of us. We cannot deny this at this stage. However, we have observed that this needs huge financing, and there is a huge financing gap. There is a pledge of about $100 billion per year, but this is the actual fund available is much lower than what is needed. So green finance is extremely important to promote environment and our environment, to purchase ecological product, goods and services that are climate resilient, and develop our climate resilient infrastructure. I just want to note that we have southern belt, which is in the seaside, and previously we can protect the embankment by 7 feet, but now it needs to develop 12 feet height. So even that increases the cost. We have huge flood because with the flash flood area, we are the downstream of Himalaya. So that's every year there is a flood. Last year, we have 5 times flood in one particular western belt. So this climate resilient infrastructure is extremely important for us. And we are happy to note that AIIB has announced that 50% of your fund will be diverted for climate resilience infrastructure. But my humble request to AIIB board and members is that this effort should be, this high ambitions or efforts has to be materialized, and it should be need-based rather than the political issues are incorporated. So it should be distributed who needs it, and it should be distributed on priority basis where it is most important for us. Thank you.
Yeah, turning to Turkey now, do you share that view that more should be done on green, or don't you also have other needs that need to be addressed?
I'm actually aligned, I have aligned feelings and thoughts like Her Excellency. I agree that investments that factor in climate considerations are the ones that will outperform conventional investments. There is also a global policy pressure for action on climate change to be stepped up this decade. That is why AIIB should continue to integrate climate change agendas into its operations. Nevertheless, climate action should be pursued in a balanced and additional way. By that I mean core development investments like in health, education, sustainable infrastructure should continue to receive as much attention as before. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think we're now moving towards the third part of our discussion before we come to questions from the audience, which you can prepare already, by the way. I see many of you scribbling in their notepads. I hope that's questions to put to our panelists later. But first, we wanted to discuss the MDB system. We want to leave the discussion about the MDB system and return a bit to the AIIB in particular. The subheading for this section is how can the AIIB evolve further? What's to come? And I wanted to start with Ludger. I mean, you know, you mentioned the time when the AIIB articles were drafted almost 10 years ago. Yeah, some years ago at least. That was a very different world in geopolitical terms. With your view from the inside, I mean, how difficult is it for the AIIB to navigate geopolitical challenges? And what are your hopes going forward, also with regard to signing up more stakeholder countries?
Yeah, this of course is a huge challenge. I mean, but what are, so to speak, what are the assets of the bank? I mean, we have a strong governance. We have strong systems and structures in place. We're still building them. You know, the bank is only 7.5 years old, but I think the Article of Agreement laid a great foundation. And then for a couple of years, I did not take care of the bank. And I've seen that in the meantime, a lot of the secondary legislation and regulation has been done. So these systems and structures, that's what makes a bank function. That's governance, so strong governance. Then the second thing that protects, I think, a bank like ours is that we could do good work, good projects, good well-performing projects, high-quality projects to a diverse client base, and that we have internally a good staff to deliver this work. So I think that's in a way our insurance for challenges. That's our assets for these challenges that we are dealing with. And fortunately, in a way, for us, there is, I mean, development, poverty reduction is a global public good. It's a local benefit, but it's a global public good. Look at the migration challenge we have. Look at the overpopulation challenge we have. I mean, development is in a way a global public good. Climate protection is a global public good. And the international community has discovered that these global public goods are essential for the survival of the planet. So I think that is really a big protection for the work of MDBs, a big support base. Now, you have then on the negative side, you know, that the world has changed and that we have these geopolitical tensions and the risk that MDBs are abused for the bickering between the countries. And that is, of course, something we have to maneuver with. Now, again, our governance is good because it says we are apolitical. We cannot support or favor one country more or country group more than others. So we are being held accountable to that by our stakeholders. And so that, I mean, that's not something you demonstrate with one project or with one board meeting or one annual meeting, but that's something you demonstrate over time. And I think that overall, I think we have done a good job to demonstrate that we are a neutral, well-performing player, growing player, evolving player, but still in this challenging world that we are a player that can be a bridge across the countries that maybe on some areas are in more conflict. So I'm quite optimistic that if, if all our members and globally countries stay halfway reasonable and rational, that we will maneuver well through these challenges.
That's a very good wish. Thank you for that. Bengu, I wanted to turn to you because in our prep discussion you said that you're very grateful for the AIIB being already innovative and flexible. Maybe you could give us some examples, what you mean and what your wishes for the future are. Thank you.
Sure. Let me put emphasis on a couple of aspects. First, MDB system, due to its limited resources, requires developing out-of-box solutions to problems. And AIIB has been active in engaging new areas and adopting new tools. AIIB became the first MDB to conduct fully remote board meetings and led the trend in the MDB community. We started using the Zoom even before the pandemic by AIIB. And also AIIB was one of the first MDBs among its peers to adopt remote working arrangements. As to your question, bank uses also innovative financial tools in its operations in delivering its mission. A recent one Ludger also mentioned was with the World Bank, IBRD, where AIIB involved in an unfunded guarantee mechanism. And this project, this guarantee of $1 billion unlocked up to $200 million of investment for below investment grade countries. So AIIB's operations and expertise cannot remain static, and innovation should continue to be the main feature of the bank. Product innovation is a key for widening business activities, deepening the impact, Innovation will play a significant role for the bank's future. We encourage the bank to increase its efforts to expand on innovative products such as green bonds, infrastructure asset-backed securities, and unfunded risk participations. And second, AIIB's business model has to be increasingly relevant to evolving global development context. To enhance the impact, it is essential for the bank to use its capital as fully as possible and maintain a diversified and financially sustainable portfolio. Continuous private finance mobilization will be important, especially regular risk transfers to private sector would free up capital for more lending. It will not be wrong if we refer MDBs as de-riskers. If there is an MDB in an investment, private sector is easily convinced to involve in that investment too. So MDB model is a tested one that helps de-risk project financing for the private sector. So AIIB should find more innovative ways to de-risk financing for the private sector. Third and last, bank has to build on local knowledge and presence. Bank has already rolled up its sleeves and begun the hard work of opening up a hub in Abu Dhabi. We appreciate that. And we believe that banks further focus on developing local presence will enable the bank to generate standalone projects and effective monitoring of the projects on the ground.
Okay. Well, thank you. We are almost at the end of our panel discussion here. Before I open to questions from the audience, I'd like to ask each of you here on the panel with me to give me a very, very short answer, 1 or 2 sentences. If you think of AIIB as a child, you know, it's 7.5 years old, it's still in primary school, still quite little, you know, but in 10 years from now, AIIB will be a grown-up. Almost a grown-up, just, you know, just coming up to 18 years, definitely feeling a grown-up at this age. What do you wish for the AIIB on its maturity in 10 years' time? Helena, you can start.
So in 10 years' time, we're 17 years away from 2050, and I get a sense that we're running out of time. So my wish would be for AIIB to have an established, long-standing, sustainable partnership for climate change mitigation in Asia, and I'm not done, it's still the same phrase, with a focus on private sector partnership. I think that's absolutely key. So that would be my wish.
Fantastic. 2 questions. Bengud? Sorry, 2 sentences. Sorry, 2 sentences.
Sure. For the sake of time, let me make an analogy here that is used generally a lot. Today, World Bank is the Snow White of the MDB system, and the other MDBs are the dwarfs, let's say. And in 10 years' time, we expect AIIB to become one of the Snow Whites. And in MDB terminology, we call it like a lender of first resort, or an MDB that is preferred to work with. That's our expectation.
I love the Snow White. Obviously, she doesn't die of the poisoned apple. She survives, so that's good. Sharifa, what do you wish for the AIIB?
I have 4 wishes. First one is the borrowing should be cost effective, depending on the level of economic development, because if it is the same, it's very difficult for the country or for us, for debt management. It will impose unnecessary burden on debt management. Second, I want that NDB achieves high ambitions of climate financing. Third one is the NDB should stand alone on its own feet rather than going for co-financing for each and every project. Final one, there will be more representation from the borrower and in the management, because now we can only see that the governor, VP, and the chair, president, all from the lender's end. But there must be also some representation from the borrower's end. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to add that in 10 years' time, I would hope that the bank remains faithful to its values. Lean, not obese. You know, I've worked for administrations all my life. Obesity is one of the big risks. Innovative instead of slow and bureaucratic, so that our members and our clients like to work with us, and we as people working for the bank like to work for the bank.
Well, thank you. Now over to you in the audience. There are some microphones roaming around on the sides. Are there any questions to our panelists? The gentleman here in the middle had his arm up first. Sorry.
Well, thank you very much. Fascinating presentations, great points. Thank you for that. Thank you, panel. My question on making sense of the multilateral development system. Is there a global coordination mechanism which is there, number one? Secondly, is there a ceiling or a floor in terms of good governance of multilateral development banks? So they do projects where they help governments on good governance, but is there any consensus within the multilateral development banks on that one? Thank you.
I think that's either for Helene or for Ludger.
Okay, I mean, I think there are some principles for good governance in the MDB world, in the government world, but the country situation is always very different. So the trick, the skill is to apply the common principles, you know, in the ESG standard world, for instance, to the country-specific situation. And when we advise countries and help them with institution building, that we are not lazy and complacent, but that we really try to shape our advice in that direction. And the second question was on the overall coordination?
Global coordination, yeah.
Well, there's certainly a need for global coordination on climate change, and I think there also, you know, there's a lot of need for global standards. There are various institutions that are responsible for global standards, and I think for global climate change there is coordination, not necessarily by the MDBs, but now we see it in the COP28 context. I personally also think, you know, coordination needs to be balanced by competition. So a healthy competition between MDBs, you know, so that the clients can choose, that's also part of a good global system. Thank you.
Thank you. There was, yeah, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm Suma Chakravarti. I'm chair of the ODI, Global Affairs Think Tank, but I was also president of the EBRD for 8 years. So I have lived through some of what I heard on the panel. Very interesting comments. I think 2 comments I'd make. One is, I think this question of country presence that Bengu raised, I think is a really fairly fundamental issue in the next 10 years for AIIB. Particularly in terms of actually being at the policy table with countries and designing projects, but also in terms of portfolio management and keeping down costs, because otherwise expensive consultants will have to be employed and are being employed. So I think that's a fairly fundamental strategic issue, I think, for the shareholders and the management that would be good to hear from. The second point I would make is around the multilateral governance. It is, I think, telling that since 1991, when EBRD was created, not one international institution, including AIIB, has gone to the resident board model, not one. And I think the AIIB, and I've written about this, has been the most successful governance model we've got. So it begs the question of the 3 panelists in the middle, who are borrowing countries and non-borrowing countries, why don't you take this argument to the legacy MDBs? Hank Paulson, Shaukat Aziz, people like that have said, those MDB boards, the resident boards, are huge in transaction costs. So I think this is a question really for the three of you. I know Ludger can't answer that question.
No, exactly. Ludger won't say anything, but the other three, starting with the second question, are you bringing it up in the EBRD, World Bank, and so on, all these expensive administrative structures? Helena.
I do believe that we do, and there is one reason in Switzerland, you know, we're a direct democracy, so we have a very high level of accountability in Switzerland, and there's always sort of when we have to go into Swiss Parliament, there's always a struggle. Should we do more bilateral? The overall numbers are clear, you know, of how much solidarity Switzerland will show, but there's always a struggle, and there are sort of camps, you know, in Parliament who should we do more bilateral? Should we do more multilateral? And I think they even sort of agreed on a 60-40% number. And then, of course, we're constantly asked on what are the really effective instruments, and it's we're very active when it's when we look at admin costs and so on and so on. Also, by the way, at UN, we're very active member of the 5th committee because we get challenged back home on you know, how we spend Swiss taxpayers' money. Now, are we always heard? I'm not sure. Our director sits here. We've just had a big discussion on another organization. If you know, we're happy with the admin cost. They're at this organization very high. It's a challenge. At the same time, of course, you don't want to you know, hit the brakes by constantly discussing these things. So we're trying. I'm not sure we're succeeding.
Any of the other two?
Hearing these words from a guru of MDB system is excellent, actually, from Suma, our previous president of EBRD. Thank you very much. And with regards to the governance structure of the big ones, World Bank, EBRD, it's not easy to change the status quo. I mean, it's really difficult because it's already actually an established mechanism. We have to see the pros and cons of changing the status quo. My first comment is that. And actually, my second comment would be with regards to the weight of the countries of operation in the board, the voice or the seat, number of seats. This should be prioritized than, I mean, changing the system. This can be my second comment.
Sharifa, would you like to comment?
Yeah, actually, yeah, they have very valid question, but we can, as she mentioned, it is not easily possible to change and ask all the MDGs to follow the AIIB system. But when it is like that, it is difficult from the countries like us to have our representation considering our economic size and others. So yeah, if everybody has the same procedure for non-resident directorships, we can also follow that. That is equal stand from all of us. So in that perspective, it is good. But also there is every MDBs has their own ways of work. So we normally as a recipient country adjust and adapt with that. But I will prefer which would be the more cost effective, because ultimately it comes the borrowers to pay all the management issues. So we should find out an innovative way so the management cost doesn't fall on us in a bigger way. That will ensure the governance in the system. Thank you.
But you know, Sharifa, we challenge you in your country, so you should really challenge us, the borrowers as well, if you feel that we're failing, because in the end, it's really important that our contributions actually create impact in your country.
We never undervalued any presence of any development partners. We always valued our development partners who might, whatever may be that their contribution. Always we have very good relationships with them, but either they're present or not. But sometimes the physical presence makes its regular interactions, crisis management and each other. But also, if it doesn't possible, then we can have non-resident directorships or management. But my appeal is that we should find out a cost-effective solution so that borrowers are really comfortable in managing their debts.
Well, thank you. We have run out of time, and I don't think we can solve the strategic question of representative offices in client regions now, because obviously that is going to be contested, and the question of lean versus presence versus paying lots for consultants versus local knowledge is that's a complicated one. So we leave that for the next annual meeting. That leaves me to thank my panelists and to thank you, audience, for excellent questions, for your patience to stay with us until 7 p.m. local time. So I wish you all a great evening and see you again next year. Thank you.